Before chainsaws, before diesel engines, before hydraulics. In the early 1900s, America needed over 33 billion board feet of lumber a year, and the only way to get it was with steam, iron, and raw human nerve. The machines they built were absolute beasts, fire-breathing, cable-snapping monsters that dragged entire trees up mountainsides, crawled grades no sane engineer would attempt, and stripped whole hillsides bare. 3 of them pushed steam age logging to its most insane extreme, and most people today have never heard of a single one. Lumber, in the early 1900s, wasn't just a building material. It was the backbone of a continent in overdrive. Every new mile of railroad demanded thousands of wooden ties. In 1920 alone, the United States laid claim to nearly 166,000 miles of track, each mile swallowing up about 2,500 ties. That's roughly 400 million ties a year just to keep the trains rolling. Cities like Chicago, Seattle, and San Francisco were exploding skyward and outward, their growth fueled by a hunger for timber that seemed impossible to satisfy. Chicago's lumber district could load 200 schooners a day, shipping millions of board feet to construction sites across the Midwest. The World's Fair buildings of 1893 devoured entire forests, turning raw logs into the symbols of American progress almost overnight. Shipyards along the Great Lakes and Pacific coast added to the pressure, demanding massive hardwoods for hulls, decks, and masts. The United States Navy's 1917 order for 250 million board feet of Douglas fir for warships pushed logging crews deeper into forests that had never seen an axe. In Michigan's Upper Peninsula, white pine stands were being stripped at a pace of 1.6 billion board feet per year by 1905. In the Pacific Northwest, Washington and Oregon mills together churned out between 30 and 40 billion board feet from the turn of the century through the 1920s. This wasn't just a local operation. Logging railroads were often laid down as fast as a crew could swing a hammer, and they spread like veins through Michigan, the Cascades, and British Columbia's interior. Temporary tracks, narrow-gauge spurs, and river drives turned remote timberlands into conveyor belts, feeding the insatiable appetite of industry. Whole hillsides vanished, replaced by stumps and sawdust, as the timber frontier advanced mile by mile. The scale was almost beyond imagination. At its peak, the nation's annual timber consumption could have built a 2-story house on every acre of forest in America. This relentless demand set the stage for the wildest, most dangerous machines ever unleashed in the woods. Machines built not just to harvest trees, but to conquer the landscape itself. The forests were vast, but the hunger for wood was even greater, and only the most extreme solutions would do. The timber was out there, deep in the wild, in places that barely had names. Michigan's Upper Peninsula held 9.3 million acres of white pine and hemlock, a green fortress stretching from Lake Superior to the Menominee River. Out west, the forests of Washington and Oregon blanketed the slopes of the Cascades and the Olympics, with around 5 million acres of towering Douglas fir and hemlock. North across the border, British Columbia's interior boasted 12 million acres of dense ancient stands. But getting those trees from stump to sawmill was a logistical nightmare. Early loggers faced a landscape built to defeat them. Rivers twisted through canyons and over rapids, sometimes carrying logs, but just as often smashing them to splinters on the rocks. Spring river drives were legendary for their chaos, hundreds of men riding logs downstream, risking life and limb to keep the timber moving. But river routes only reached so far, and the best stands often grew miles from any navigable water. Temporary railroads became the arteries of the timber frontier. Narrow-gauge spurs, some as light as 30-pound rail, were hammered into place over mud, snow, and granite. In Michigan, logging lines snaked 112 miles from the Menominee River to Marquette, while in British Columbia, outfits like the Caslow and Slocum laid down over 600 miles of track just to chase the next stand. These rails were not built to last. Crews tore them up and relaid them wherever the timber moved, sometimes shifting an entire railroad in a single season. The tracks twisted up grades too steep for regular engines, with curves so sharp that a conventional locomotive would derail before it made the bend. Every mile further into the woods meant more obstacles. Steep ridges, deep ravines, and thick undergrowth slowed everything down. Horses and oxen could only pull so much, and the cost of building permanent roads or bridges was out of reach for most logging companies. The need for raw power, something that could drag trees out of impossible places or crawl up a washed-out track with a trainload of logs, became urgent. The forests were vast, but the real challenge was moving the timber out before the next big order arrived. Out of this bottleneck, the era's wildest machines were born. The first of these absolute beasts, the steam donkey, would soon change the rules of the game. Steam power changed everything in the woods. Before Dolbear's invention, hauling a log meant teams of oxen, back-breaking labor, and days lost to mud and hills. Then came the steam donkey, a machine so powerful and strange it seemed almost reckless. Patented in 1882 by John Dolbear, this beast could pull 5 tons of timber in a single haul, dragging logs straight uphill or yanking them across ravines that would stop a horse dead. A boiler, roaring at up to 200 pounds per square inch, fed a single-cylinder engine that spun a massive drum, winding steel cable with a force that could rip a tree from the ground. The whole contraption sat on wooden skids, ready to be dragged deeper into the forest whenever the timber moved on. With every pull, the donkey's whistle echoed through the pines, signaling another log on its way to the landing. No animal could match it. No crew, no matter how tough, could outmuscle its raw mechanical pull. In the eyes of early loggers, it was nothing short of wild, an unstoppable engine that turned the impossible into routine and made the old ways look like child's play. Steam power in the woods meant raw, unpredictable force, channeled through a machine that looked more like a rolling boiler house than any modern equipment. At the heart of every steam donkey sat a fire tube boiler, often 10 feet long and nearly 6 feet across, gulping down wood or coal to build pressure as high as 200 pounds per square inch. That pressure drove a single-cylinder engine, which in turn spun a massive drum wound with up to 1,800 feet of steel cable. Each cable, sometimes as thick as a man's thumb, stretched out into the forest, ready to drag logs from impossible places. Running this beast took a tight crew. The donkey puncher, or engineer, manned the controls, regulating steam, watching the gauges, and deciding when to wind in or let out the line. The fireman kept the boiler fed and the water topped off, working in a haze of smoke and sweat. Out in the brush, the choker setter clamped a heavy metal jaw around the base of each log, while the whistle punk stood ready to signal with a coded blast, short and long, each pattern meaning pull, stop, or pay out slack. Everyone relied on the line tender to keep the cable moving smoothly through pulleys and over brush, always alert for a snag or a tangle that could turn deadly in an instant. Every haul was a carefully timed dance between man and machine, where one mistake could mean disaster. The donkey's power was nothing without the crew's precision, and in the steam era, both were pushed to their limits. Steel cable, wound drum-tight around the donkey's winch, could store enough energy to rival a speeding truck. When a cable snapped, it did not just fall limp. It whipped through the forest like a steel blade, moving too fast for a man to dodge. In 1912, 5 loggers on Washington's Olympic Peninsula died in a single season from snapped lines, each death described by local papers as instantaneous. The cable would slice through brush, bark, even bone, leaving no time for warning whistles or shouted alarms. Boilers brought their own terror. Pressures reached 200 pounds per square inch, and a single mistake, such as a low water level or a stuck safety valve, could trigger a blast that tore the donkey apart. A 1908 explosion near Port Townsend hurled the boiler's metal shell 30 feet into the trees, killing the donkey puncher and 2 crewmen. Survivors described finding fragments of the machine embedded in the ground, as if a bomb had gone off. One logger's grandson still remembers his grandfather's words. You could smell the coal and hear the whistle, but everyone kept an eye on the cable. If it sang, you moved. If it screamed, you ran. The risk was not just part of the job, it was the job. Every haul was a gamble, paid for in blood and steel. Temporary logging railroads were a marvel of speed and improvisation, but they were also a nightmare for anyone trying to move tons of timber. Crews hammered down narrow-gauge track over whatever ground lay ahead: mud, snow, loose gravel, even tree stumps. Rails as light as 30 pounds per yard twisted and buckled under the weight of loaded cars. Ballast was an afterthought, if it existed at all. On a good day, a conventional locomotive might crawl a few miles before hitting a grade too steep or a curve too tight. More often, engines derailed, wheels spun helplessly in the mud, and whole trains ended up jackknifed in the brush. A curve with a 50-foot radius would send a standard engine off the rails before it ever saw the next bend. Grades of 12% or more, unthinkable on mainline railroads, were routine in the woods. The fragility of these tracks meant every run risked disaster. Timber companies needed a locomotive that could climb like a mountain goat, flex around impossible corners, and keep moving even when the rails were barely more than a suggestion. Without a new kind of engine, millions of dollars in timber would stay stranded in the forest, out of reach and out of profit. Ephraim Shea wasn't satisfied watching valuable timber stranded on hillsides, while ordinary locomotives spun their wheels in the mud. In 1877, he patented a machine that was nothing short of mechanical madness for its time, a geared steam locomotive built to tackle the wildest tracks loggers could lay. Instead of the classic side rods, Shea's engine ran with a vertical cylinder steam engine driving a crankshaft, which in turn spun a heavy gear shaft, running the length of the locomotive. Every axle got power directly through bevel gears, so nothing was wasted on slippery rails or uneven ground. This meant a Shea could crawl up grades as steep as 14%, grades that would leave a regular engine helpless, and snake through curves as tight as a radius of 50 feet without derailing. Some models weighed over 100,000 pounds and could haul 200 tons of logs up a twisting temporary track made of the lightest, cheapest rail imaginable. The result was a locomotive that didn't just survive the woods, it dominated them, dragging entire trains through terrain that had defeated every other machine. The genius was in the gears, and the insanity was in what loggers dared these engines to do. Every run with a Shea locomotive was a gamble with gravity and steel. These geared engines could claw their way up 14% grades and snake through 50-foot curves, but that power came with a price. Crews pushed the limits, hauling 200 tons of logs on tracks barely spiked into the forest floor. When a Shea lost its grip, the results could be catastrophic. In June 1915, a Shea derailed on a 13.8% grade in northern Idaho. The locomotive jackknifed on a tight curve, sending cars tumbling into the ravine and killing 3 men. The official report blamed excessive speed and the fragile 30-pound rail, but every logger knew the risk started the moment the engine fired up. Sheas opened up forests no horse or ox could reach, but they also brought disaster closer to the worksite. Runaway log cars, snapped couplers, and shifting loads turned every trip into a test of nerve. The tractive effort, over 30,000 pounds on some models, meant a single mistake could send entire trains off the rails. These machines did not just conquer the woods, they left scars on the land and the people who worked them. The deeper the railroads pushed, the more the forests fell, and the higher the toll climbed. The iron centipede didn't just look out of place in the woods, it looked like something that had crawled out of a fever dream. Imagine a steel skeleton nearly 50 feet long, bristling with gears, levers, and two enormous cable drums mounted like the eyes of some mechanical beast. Each drum could swallow up to 2,000 feet of thick steel cable, enough to reach deep into a forest and drag logs that weighed as much as 8 tons each. The operator's cabin sat perched high above the ground, giving the crew a view over the chaos as the twin booms swung out like arms, ready to snatch whole trees from the hillside. Every inch of the centipede was built for brute force. It had reinforced bands on the drums to keep them from exploding under load, and extra-wide cabins so the crew could see through the haze of steam and smoke. When this machine fired up, the ground shook. The iron centipede didn't just move logs, it could clear an entire log yard in a single shift, shifting the landscape itself with a power that bordered on reckless. In the world of early logging, nothing else came close to its raw, jaw-dropping capacity. The price of all this power was brutal, and nowhere was it more obvious than in the wake of the iron centipede's path. Skidders like these did not just move trees. They erased entire hillsides in a single shift, leaving behind nothing but bare earth, tangled roots, and stumps as far as the eye could see. The ground, once thick with moss and undergrowth, turned to mud and dust and washed away with every rain. Wildlife vanished, streams clogged with silt, and the scars left by clear cuttings stretched for miles. For the crews, the danger was constant. A single misstep near a swinging log could mean instant death. In 1918, a snapped cable pulled a 4-ton log onto 3 men in the Oregon Cascades, killing them all before anyone could react. The grief and anger in the camps boiled over. That same year, 120 loggers signed a petition demanding mandatory cable inspections and safety rules, and it was one of the first organized protests in North American logging. The machines got the timber out, but the cost was measured in broken bodies and stripped land, fueling a backlash that would haunt the industry for decades. Steam giants once ruled the forests, but their reign ended almost as quickly as it began. Diesel engines began rolling into logging camps in the late 1920s, promising more work for less fuel. A diesel tractor could run all day without stopping for water, burning about 1/3 less fuel per ton of timber moved. Crews no longer needed to shovel coal or keep a boiler under pressure. One operator could do the work of 4. By 1935, trade journals calculated that diesel saved about 45 cents per cord, a game changer for companies counting every penny. New regulations pushed the old machines out even faster. The Federal Timber Sale Act of 1915 and the Soil Conservation Act of 1935 demanded replanting and erosion control. The U.S. Forest Service labeled steam boilers obsolete in its 1938 machinery manual, favoring cleaner, quieter diesels. Most steam donkeys, shays, and skidders were scrapped for metal during the Depression and World War II. Today, only a handful survive. Restoration costs run as high as $250,000, and legal ownership is often tangled. Museums display these beasts as relics, reminders of an era when ambition and raw power shaped both people and the land. Today, the wild machines that once tore through North America's forests are museum relics, but their legacy is everywhere. More than 80% of old-growth forests in the lower 48 states are gone, a direct result of that era's appetite and ambition. As we debate the future of our last wild places, those insanely powerful beasts still echo in every fallen tree. For more stories like this, hit subscribe.